there everybody, Matt here from the Plain Streams of Comic Books channel, and today we're going to talk about that time Jim Corrigan had a Devil's Three-Way, kind of. Now this all came about because I have the DC Universe app, so I've been going through checking out old runs of stuff that's not really in print anywhere, like I just finished the JLA Classified run from the 2000s, and I just moved on to reading the Spectre from the 80s. Now, before we get into the scandalous details of these issues, I just wanted to give a shout out to Sasha from Casually Comics, whose Kurt's panel series was an inspiration for this video. And if you haven't seen her vids, definitely go check them out. She's awesome. Anyway, back to the Spectre. This story takes place in issues 5 and 6 of Volume 2 of the Spectre, which ran 31 issues from 1986 to 1989, and was written by Doug Mensch with art by Gene Colan and Steve Mitchell. This series comes directly out of issue 10 of Crisis on Infinite Earths, and also Alan Moore's Swamp Thing issues 49 and 50. And in those, Spectre first fights the Anti-Monitor in issue 10 of Crisis on Infinite Earths, who is collapsing all the DC multiverses into one Earth, killing untold billions in the process. He fails to defeat the Anti-Monitor, and then tries to help Swamp Thing and John Constantine defeat the original Darkness, the one before God made everything. And unfortunately, he failed that too. And that's where we start with the Spectre in this series. He's come back severely underpowered, so much so that he must have a symbiotic relationship with Jim Corrigan. In the previous volume, Spectre would transform Jim at will, but now he's a separate being that's more like a ghost who leaves Jim's body, but he must return within 48 hours, or both he and Jim will die. Now, the process for how Jim and Spectre were trapped in this arrangement is kind of convoluted and long, but in a nutshell, Jim had been killed and put in a large vessel to wait for the resurrection of the Spectre. In the meantime, Madame Xanadu facilitated the retrieval of the vessel with Jim's body in it for the return of the depowered Spectre. And all of that happens in issue 1 of this series. And now that that's out of the way, we start with issue 5, called The Mystery of My Murder. As you might have guessed, Jim, who since Resurrection has become a private eye, has nagging questions about his death. He needs to know how he died and how he got into the vessel. So as he ponders this, we see the newspaper headline which says the 9th subway worker dies. And this of course is foreshadowing for later. The headline seems to jog something in his mind, and as he leaves his office, he tells his secretary/love interest Kim Liang that he's going to take a ride on the subway. When he arrives at the subway, he starts looking for clues, and as he stares down the tunnel, he sees red smoke in the air. But before he can jump down and investigate, a man attempts to rob him. And right here is where you can see how the Spectre's powers differ from previous versions. Instead of Jim transforming into the Spectre comes out of him as a separate entity and scares the mugger off. This is also important because when Jim and the Spectre are separated, Jim has no way of detecting supernatural entities or powers. He's just a regular human, which comes into play later on. After the mugger was dispatched by Spectre, Jim finds a clue in his old apartment, and he comes back to his office to meet with Madame Xanadu, whose tarot card reading shop is below his office. On the way down a back set of stairs that happens to have no lights, Jim and his assistant Kim Liang get a bit frisky and end up making out, and this is some foreshadowing for what happens later. So once they finish feeling each other up and making out, they speak to Madame Xanadu, who reads Jim's cards, causing him to remember a woman named Gina that he was in love with before his death. Specifically, the last thing he remembered was kissing Gina and red smoke coming out of her mouth. So now, of course, Jim is confused by this memory of red smoke and Gina, so Jim goes to Gina's house to see if he can find some clues, and it is demolished. And as he gets on site, he has some more flashbacks of what happened with him and Gina and their relationship, and he comes to the conclusion that the red smoke is what killed him, though he's not sure what Gina has to do with it. So he goes back to the subway where he saw the red smoke last. And on his way there, he calls his office and tells Kim Liang to meet him there and to bring a flashlight, which she does. And he tries to go into the tunnels alone, but Kim insists that she should go with him. Now, as this is happening with Jim, the Spectre has separated and is off on his own sleuthing mission. In fact, he doesn't care at all about how Jim Corrigan died, and he lets Jim know that fact. So as Jim and Kim walk far into the tunnel, they're confronted by the red smoke, which has turned itself into a big snake construct. This is a trick, and the snake is actually blocking an oncoming train about to hit Jim and Kim. Jim barely jumps out of the way in time, but he's knocked unconscious to the ground. Issue 5 ends here, and issue 6, titled The Murder of My Mystery, picks up right where it left off. The train is gone, and as Jim comes to, he no longer has the flashlight. As such, it's pitch black, and as Jim calls out for Kim, she calls back to him in the darkness. They find each other, and like before in the dark back stairwell to Madame Xanadu's, they immediately begin to make out. But this time they don't stop there. They don't go into specifics, but they make it pretty clear that Jim and Kim make love, or at least he makes love to who he thinks is Kim. As Jim straightens himself up and stands, Kim calls him lover and he finds that odd. So he pulls out his Zippo and he lights it, and he finds himself alone, covered in what he thinks is lipstick from the throes of passion, and Kim is nowhere to be found. In desperation, Jim breaks through a wall in the tunnel area, and he finds Kim, and of course he's confused by this. Kim? Then you were with me. But how did you get out? How did you get in here? When you shoved me, I hit my head, blacked out. Came to in here. Then she shines her light on Jim and she asks, "This red stuff, Jim, what is it?" Would you believe lipstick?" "Jim, this isn't lipstick, it's blood." Then she transforms into Jim's ex-lover, Gina. So, in case you didn't catch that, Jim just made love to the ghost of Gina, thinking that it was Kim. But that's not all. Once Gina is revealed, she begins to decompose into a corrupted version of herself and attacks Jim. But luckily, Spectre arrives just in time to save him. And now we get the panel that made me stop and question exactly what happened with Kim/Gina in the dark. As Spectre fights with the decomposing Gina monster, it transforms again, and this time into a man, which it says is its true form. And this is where I did a double take, and I had to go back and make sure I read the last couple pages correctly. Now, this supernatural three-way encounter is never really brought up again, at least as far as issue 12, which is where I'm at right now in the run. And of course, the rest of the issue is just Spectre defeating this monster, and Jim finding out that Gina, when she was alive, was playing him, and most likely did not love him as much as he loved her. So as Jim leaves the tunnel confused, he runs into the real Kim, who's been waiting there the whole time with the flashlight. And by now, Jim knows he made love to the corrupted Gina, who was pretending to be Kim. And I guess technically Jim doesn't know that the monster was actually male, because he was already running away by the time the monster revealed that. But even the fact that he had sex with his dead ex-lover doesn't really seem to faze him. In fact, the only effect it has on him now is that Jim feels guilty about sleeping with Gina, and he wants things to be okay with him and Kim. So out of nowhere, he just kind of blurts out his feelings to her. "I love Gina a lot, but that was in the past. New man now. Nothing in the way of future love if it comes to that. Understand?" And of course, Kim is not receptive to this because it comes completely out of the blue since she wasn't in the tunnels for any of it. And there you have it. Jim Corrigan had a supernatural Devil's Three-Way and never knew it. And it probably never comes up again, but it would be great if Spectre holds on to that secret and uses it to get back at Jim at some opportune time. But that probably won't happen because of the time period that this came out, and the stuff that they fight about isn't as serious as that. So if you like what you saw, definitely go check out those issues on DC Infinite Universe, or pick up those issues at your local comic book store, and we will see y'all in the next one.